Okay, so here we are. Welcome back to Sabah MeeM, our fourth and final episode. And it's my delight and honor to welcome the last and definitely not least guest, Dima Mikhayel Matta, who's with me right now, live. Well, this isn't broadcasting live, but it's live to me in this moment, from Beirut. And I'm not going to do a big, massive, detailed intro for you, Dima, because we're going to get into all of the details of your work. Well, I've got a really squeaky chair, like pre-Halloween. But yeah, Dima is a really talented actress and theatre maker and writer, and is involved in loads of different projects and initiatives. And we're going to be hearing about them in much more detail. So welcome, Dima.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be in this conversation with you. And it's so good to
Yeah,
see you.
yeah, you too. And actually, I really wanted to start by kind of just really thanking you, especially for being here, actually, because, I guess hopefully it won't be lost on anybody who's watching this in a week or so when we broadcast it now in October 2020, that like for anyone who's in Beirut right now, it's no small thing for you to even get it together and be on the phone to us. And I just think it's impressive that any of you are up and dressed. And I want to really thank you for being here and giving us your energy and time and focus, to whatever extent you have them. So yeah, really thrilled that you can be here.
Thank you. I'm
And
glad to be here too.
yeah, and so what we kind of know that our real focus is on this show and in our conversation that we want to have tonight, um, is art and artists and queerness. And there's always kind of an activist or political, of course, bent to our lives and our approach. But obviously, right now, there is no conversation that can happen, with somebody in Beirut without talking about kind of the events of now. So we're going to start by, I just want to ask you to tell us really what happened and is happening this summer and autumn in Lebanon.
Well, I mean, globally, we're all in a time of a pandemic. So that's happening. We're also in Lebanon in times of a total economic collapse. And the country is suffering from hyperinflation. So anything is more than 4 times what it used to cost before. So the dollar was 1,500 Lebanese pounds, and now it's 8,500 Lebanese pounds.
Yeah.
And on August 4th, at 6:07 p.m., there was a massive explosion at the port of Beirut that devastated the city. More than 200 people died, more than 6,000 people were injured, and about 300,000 people became homeless. And this was due to 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate exploding at the port. And this was due to a massive neglect from the government to sort out what's happening at the port. And it just was another moment in our recent history that only confirmed that the government is slowly killing us over the years, whether by neglecting us, neglecting our needs, or by intentionally harming us and oppressing us. So streets have been devastated. Entire shops, bars, restaurants, homes have been erased. And yeah, that's kind of where we are right now.
So a confirmation of something that you already knew, like an expansion of something that you already witnessed that was being done, very much being done to you as a people.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
It's funny, ever since the pandemic started, I've been in a constant state of nostalgia, looking at old
Mm.
photos and digging through Facebook memories of what I wrote on that specific day, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 10
Mm.
years ago. And one of the things I realized is that 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I was also writing about explosions, car bombs,
Mm.
um, um, the economy, corrupt politicians, protests.
Mm.
So it's been that way for as
Mm.
long as I can remember.
Mhm. Wow, so it's really important that we get that, actually, isn't it? That we who are outside of Lebanon get that this is a change in scale rather than a complete aberration. Would that be right to say?
Yes.
Hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So the level of trauma in the city and in the country right now is kind of hard to imagine from the outside. And people, I should just say, for people who might be watching who don't usually connect very much with Lebanon or with Beirut, that, like, for those of us that have loved ones and friends in your city and in your country, we were already fucking worried before the blast happened. It was already a kind of extreme, feeling like a really extreme point that things had got to, right? And yeah,
Yeah.
with food prices and all the rest of it. Yeah. So, how is this current situation unfolding for queer people in the city?
Um,
Or what's some of the ways in which they're specifically been impacted?
well, a lot of, I mean, right, not to generalize, but also as an artist, I know that a lot of queer artists, people who perform in drag, um,
Mm.
and perform at bars, at clubs, at any kind of artist venue. Since the pandemic and all these places shut down, and then they've had no income.
Mm.
And then as after July, the lockdown eased, some places reopened, and we thought, okay, the art scene, will come back to life to some
Mm.
extent. And then the explosion happened, and not only did these places close, but a lot of them just disappeared. They were
Mm.
completely demolished.
Yeah.
So,
So devastated, really. Yeah.
so a lot of queer people lost their homes, they lost their livelihood. And one of the beautiful things that a lot of activists and queer activists are doing is actually as soon as the explosion happened, they set up a queer relief fund,
Mm.
uh, sending hot meals every day to people from the LGBTQ plus community, helping them, if their windows are shattered, their doors, because doors just kind of popped out of like their hinges. Um,
So
you
not
know,
just the glass breaking, the actual thing of the door, the actual piece itself being blasted out.
oh yeah, yeah, just the
Mm.
frame. It just everything popped out of frames.
Mm.
And so that's, and they've been raising funds for that. So I'm and this is one of the things that as dark as our days get, just seeing initiatives like these, because the government is completely absent, right? They're
Mhm.
not doing anything to help. And
Mhm.
so any initiative has been completely grassroots,
Yeah.
led by individuals and groups and communities, and that's been beautiful to witness. I mean, we should not have to witness it, in the sense that we
Yeah.
should not have to provide relief,
Yeah.
but
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we were talking the other day, weren't we, about how, it's kind of easy sometimes from the outside to glamorize a bit that, I mean, not to glamorize that, but when really amazing self-organizing relief stuff starts happening, and it seems like there's a space for other ways of organizing society to open up, and, underground alternative economies and self-organizing systems, and you can get a bit carried away about how fertile that potential is. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, like, people are having to do really hard work and get out there and sweep the streets whilst exhausted and traumatized, and
Yeah.
with this hyperinflation thing where you can't even just go buy yourself a sandwich or whatever. And yeah, the multiple challenges of it are what sound really terrifying to me, I think, from the outside.
Oh, absolutely. And there's this recurrent image that people associate with Lebanon, is that it's a resilient country, we're resilient
Mm,
people, and that
mm.
they always liken it to a phoenix that rises from the ashes.
Yeah,
And we
so
hate
problematic.
this discourse. We are so exhausted
Yeah,
by this discourse. You know, there's um, nothing resembling a phoenix. We're exhausted. We're
yeah,
traumatized.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and just
You
people
shouldn't be
calling
happy to
us.
rise sometimes. Sorry, go on.
Oh, just to say that people calling us resilient and applauding us for that is
Mm.
sort of erasing and undermining what we've been through and what we
Yeah,
are going through.
absolutely. I mean, I think it's a really oppressive narrative worldwide that's kind of gained a lot of currency. I think. I don't know. I mean, I guess it was probably used a lot in the narrative here in Britain, for example, where I am around the Second World War or whatever. I'm sure, but that it seems to me to have got a lot more currency in the last kind of 10 or 20 years. This idea that, like, after when we've had bombings in London or whatever on a different scale to what you're talking about, but there's this whole narrative about kind of like Londoners won't be cowed, we won't be scared, and it's like there's no room for the actual reality of trauma, and that
Yeah.
that gets erased. So I think it's a really kind of horrendous kind of macho capitalist mode of thinking, isn't it? This whole resilience thing.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so how queer really to kind of resist that whilst also being activists and being resilient, right? I mean, that's
Hmm.
the kind of resisting the binary of you're either collapsed into weakness as a victim who can't get up and sweep the street, or you're this bionic super being who's doing everything and has no needs and for nurture. So to resist that binary and have something that's all of those things and none of them seems like a useful, like, queer approach to it. Um, and tell us some about some more stuff that's going on, because I know that you're involved in various relief efforts and so on, right? And it sounds like the
Yeah.
artists, queer people, as well as many people who are not queer and not artists, right, have really stepped up though in a really amazing way. So tell us some more about that.
Well, I'm part of a theater relief group initiative, and
Mm,
we kind of started that 2 days after the blast, and it was started by a theater maker I know who, because she has a child and she lives also with her father and couldn't go down to the streets and actively be on the ground helping, sweeping, cleaning.
mm,
And she felt like so many of us completely paralyzed and helpless. So she just created a WhatsApp group with and invited all like the theater makers she knew, and then told us to invite other theater makers we know. And we just decided that we're going to come together and raise funds for artists and theater makers who have suffered because of the blast. Especially that a lot of the theater venues are not too far away from where the blast happened. So we have at least 6 theater venues that have been severely damaged.
mm.
So, and theater makers and artists in general have absolutely no support from the government,
Yeah.
no health insurance. Almost all of them are freelancers, and so if they need follow up with doctors, if they need treatment, relocating to another apartment, etc., they have absolutely no support and no steady income. So it
Mm.
was very important for us to make sure that we support each other in these times.
Amazing. Yeah. And so that, as I understand it, well, and also let's say what exactly what it's called, because we will put a graphic along this film with the, where can we find you on Facebook, I think best.
On Facebook and Instagram, under
Mhm.
Theater Relief Group in Lebanon, and
Okay.
Theater ER.
Okay. Yeah. And so well, fair enough. You can't all write like me. um, what was I going to say? Distracting myself with my naff comment. Yeah, so it sounds like it's really grown, right? It's really grown. Like from that initial WhatsApp group, there's quite a lot of stuff going on with that, right? With the theatre relief group.
Absolutely, we're more than 100 people now, more than 100 theater
Wow.
practitioners working together, and in a very organized way, considering we're a grassroots initiative. And
Mm,
we've raised around $20,000 so far,
mhm.
a bit more than
Amazing.
that. And we also, what
So
we ended up doing,
you take donations, right? Like people can donate from the outside, presumably.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, they can just check out the pages and get
Mhm.
in touch with us, and we'll tell them how they can donate and
Yeah.
help.
And so, and you've raised this money and you've been funding individuals as relief packages for individuals, or how does it work?
Yeah, so basically, one subgroup from the initiative, they do needs assessment. So
Mm,
theater makers they help them fill out a form on what was damaged, what kind of physical damage their apartment was damaged, the venue they work at, etc. And based
mhm.
on that needs assessment, then the funds and donations are allocated.
Amazing. Yeah. And there must be so much need for that, especially as you say, in a vacuum of any kind of state support for that kind of reconstruction and stuff at this time. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk. We're going to come back, I'm sure, again and again to the topic of kind of now and how you're all coping. But it would be really lovely if we could talk a bit more broadly about, well, I guess there's two kind of real avenues that I wanted to explore. One would be to just sort of look at, because we're talking in this really dark moment and we're being honest about some really terrifying stuff that's going on in Beirut. But there's a really amazing queer history and queer present, isn't there, in Lebanon? And it'd be great if you could tell us a bit about how that's been and the highs and lows of that, because I know you've, as the founder of the Cliffhangers storytelling platform night, I suppose,
Yes,
event.
platform.
Platform, you've kind of had some difficult moments, right? I'm thinking of when Beirut Pride, was cancelled at the last minute and all of that stuff. And yeah, so maybe you could talk a bit about the kind of queer art scene in Lebanon. That's not too general.
Sure. Uh, well, to the best of my abilities,
Mhm.
but just a quick background,
Mhm.
kind of or context for this is that homosexuality is still illegal in Lebanon.
Mm.
There's a penal code 534 that states that any unnatural sexual act that is against nature is illegal, and so they use
Mm.
that penal code. That is a result of the French mandate, by the way, of
Mm.
course,
Mm.
um,
Who
that
knew,
we
huh?
had.
It
Oh
wasn't.
yeah,
It wasn't organic Arab homophobia. You mean it came from
no,
Europe?
you'd be surprised.
What the fuck?
Yeah, just good old remnants of the French mandate,
Just a little free
and
gift you got on the side.
absolutely, they're like, here's some conservative ideologies. See you later.
Yeah,
So
to serve up with the entrenched structural economic problems and militarization and so on and so on and
absolutely.
fascism and all the rest of it. Yeah. Yeah. So
So
you've got
so
that
right.
penal
So
code, and that's really enforced, right?
to different extents. So it's becoming, and it's hard to see that day by day, but as soon as we take a step back and realize and kind of take notice of what's been happening or what has happened in the past 30 years, 20, 10, and even in the past 5 years, there has been progress.
Yeah.
which is beautiful, right? We're seeing more and more queer art, and more queer friendly spaces pop up in the city.
Mm.
So, I don't want to paint this image where we're all victims of oppression and we're all living in hiding,
Mm.
which is to some extent true, especially as you get out of the city, right?
Mm.
Beirut is a bubble. As soon as you
Yeah.
go out to villages and the periphery, then that is a completely different stories. And I don't feel like I can even speak to that because I'm so privileged to be able to live in Beirut.
Yeah.
Um,
Presumably within Beirut, there's a class difference as well, I imagine, right?
of course, of
I
course.
mean, what I mean is the class difference that affects that the extent to which people can
Yeah, and
live
it's something
out.
as noticeable, as easily noticeable as the fact that I'm privileged enough to have my own apartment, and so if I have a partner, they can come and spend
Mm.
time here, right? If we're not comfortable with public display of affection, then at least we have this safe space. But so
Mm.
many people are not financially independent, and they have to live with their parents,
Mm.
and their parents don't know that they're queer or trans, etc. And so
Mm.
they don't have that safe
Mm.
space. Their homes are not safe spaces.
Mm.
So so that's just kind of one indication or one
Yeah.
example of how
Yeah.
class comes into play.
Yeah, of course. And so, yeah, it's really important. I feel like coming back to this again and again today, but the thing of resisting that binary to not be and to neither be that it's totally oppressive and totally impossible, or that it's totally, liberated
Mm-hmm.
and free or whatever. I mean, as anywhere as well. But yeah, it's interesting because there's a sort of almost cliche or tendency if you're programming queer work, or like with the queer anthology of Arabic or sort of Arab world writing that I'm putting together, that you can, if you're not careful, it'll all be Lebanese. So that's the kind of joke, isn't it? Like, well, don't just get 5 Lebanese people. You got to get some, like it's the easy. But what an amazing thing! What an amazing thing to be able to say, right? Like, oh, come on, you put a panel together and they're all Lebanese? Well, yeah, big wow. In terms of queerness, I mean, in terms of but that's kind of fascinating that I mean, that's something that we could talk about all night separately to anything else. But like, why is that? It's simply put, why has Beirut been able to be kind of the capital of queerness for the so-called Arab world?
um, I don't know. I don't know how to begin to unpack and deconstruct and talk about all the layers of why that is, right? But
What, you can't just give
um,
us a really essentialist universalizing answer based in like really problematic assumptions and then we move on? Oh, Dima.
I know, I'm failing already. Bad queer, bad Arab queer.
We wanted this show to be a sociological document so we'd all understand. Yeah, well, that's something that we can all go on thinking about, isn't it? Really, I mean, it's
Mhm.
fascinating to me how this stuff all interweaves, right? And yeah, um, and some of the stuff. So, do you want to talk about like the intersection of Cliffhangers and Pride that year, and some
Yeah.
of the things that have gone on in this sort of queer arts realm?
Yes, I would love to. So basically, in 2017, the first Beirut Pride was organized.
Mm.
And it was a whole week series of events, discussions, etc. And the organizer approached me about doing an LGBTQ plus storytelling night.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I've been doing storytelling since 2014, hosting an event every month around different themes, and it's always been an LGBTQ plus friendly place. And so of course I said yes,
Mm.
and we scheduled it to be the second night after the opening. And what ended up happening is that the first night, kind of the opening event, was canceled because the venue received threats from
Mm.
extremist groups.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was canceled, and my event was the following day. And I remember, and I was doing it on this rooftop of an art space called Station, and it's a really big rooftop and beautiful. And I got there earlier and to help set up, and I thought nobody is going to show up. It's just going to be me, the storytellers, and like our friends.
Yeah.
And then suddenly people started pouring in, and we
Mm.
ended up with 400 people packed
Oh.
on that rooftop. And usually the event is a couple of hours long, and this one went on from about 8:30 to midnight, because during the open mic, people just wanted to keep, come up and tell their coming out stories and share. And so we just kept on going till midnight. It was absolutely magical. It's definitely one of my favorite nights. I think we made history that night.
It is a kind of legendary night. You've brought me out in goosebumps, actually, your description.
Oh, me too. And I was there.
I love that we can share our virtual goosebumps. I mean, virtually share them. Yeah. So so I think that was the only event that managed to actually run in that whole Pride week, wasn't it? Or
well, actually, no. So in 2017, other events were able to happen after that. It's in 2018 that they came in and shut down one of the first events. They arrested the organizer and made him sign a paper saying that no event will happen under the umbrella of Beirut Pride. Otherwise, they will.
So just to be clear, so in 2017, it was threats from extremist groups, kind of homophobic, right? That got in the way. But in 2018, it was state intervention, presumably around this penal code.
Right. And they said, what was it? They used to promote blasphemy and heresy and debauchery. So I'm like, yeah, great.
Sounds like a great night.
Please, let's do that all the time.
On a rooftop.
I'm like, oh no, they're on to us. That's what we're trying to do all the fucking time.
They discovered our hobby.
So,
yeah.
I know. Favorite thing to do. Yeah. So what ended up happening is that all the events were canceled. And then I felt like just like a tiny cat sneaking in. And I'm like, so I'm thinking that at the time I was also hosting, I had curated an arts exhibit around LGBTQ art and poetry, and so that was showing at that same venue at Station. And so I thought, okay, if I could just like erase all the mentions of Beirut Pride and say that it's under the umbrella of this exhibition that flew under the radar, then I can get away with it. And so yeah, I'm like, okay, let's try, and then if I get arrested, then we'll see what happens. And I remember I used to teach at university at that time, and a colleague of mine came to attend the storytelling night, and it was a Friday, and final exams were on Monday. And so I go up to him and I say, okay, so listen, long story short, I'm queer, and this event should not happen, so I might be arrested. Just in case, I'm going to email you my exams, and in case I'm arrested, can you give my students the exam? And he's like, okay, sure, I'll do that. I was not arrested. The event was beautiful, and we got away with it.
That's quite an amazing coming out story in itself, actually. The like, so don't worry about that now. The point is the exam text.
Yes.
So, but that was you're talking 2018 then, aren't
2018.
You? Yeah. And so what about since then? Have you been able to have Pride events in the last couple of years?
No, I think due to several reasons, it sort of kind of died down. There are, what's beautiful though is that you know, a lot of LGBTQ plus events were kind of squeezed into this 1 week. But what's
Mhm.
beautiful, every year there are more queer events that are happening throughout the year, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so we don't need that 1 week. I mean, we need all the weeks, right? We need every single day, every single hour.
yeah,
But yes, to just feel like we can take up this space and have these events and
yeah.
openly advertise them as queer
Mm.
has been beautiful.
And yeah, that is really amazing, isn't it? Because you're talking in one instance about, you know, police coming and arresting people, and then in the same breath, almost, you're talking about advertising stuff as queer. So that's again going
Mhm.
back to what we were saying about the multiplicity of it not being either totally possible nor totally impossible. Um, yeah. Um, so that sounds really, really lovely. And I know that there's lots of interesting, amazing kind of queer artists that we, you know, that over at Outburst in Belfast, for example, have experienced stuff. And, you know, it's great. It's great that that kind of outpouring of queer art and stuff. Um,
Yeah.
what about now in the aftermath of the blast and the compounding of the various issues that we were talking about all at once? How, you know, it'd be interesting to hear a bit about how people are feeling about making art, because I know you've told me that there's quite a diversity of response in terms of whether or not
Mhm.
people feel like doing
Um,
that.
because I've been in so many conversations with other fellow artists and theater makers, um, there are people um, who just said, you know, this is not the time for art.
Mm,
This is the time for, it's a state of emergency. We need
mm,
to survive. We need to help others survive. And then maybe we'll make art later.
mm,
And then other people are, you know, on the other side of the spectrum are people who are saying, okay, let's make art now because it's all we have, it's all we know how to do, and art heals.
mm,
So let's make it, right?
mm,
And so there's been different kinds of responses, and this has been building up before the blast, right? In times of pandemic and economic collapse, I was having conversations before August 4th about how do we expect people to pay for theater tickets? Like,
yeah,
would they want to, you know, pay to attend a play?
yeah,
Right. So we were already asking all of these questions. Who's going to fund us?
mm,
How are we going to get people to attend the events? So we're
mm,
already thinking of all of this, and now we're thinking of, you know, we need to fix these venues so that we have a place to perform.
mm, mm,
And if we don't, then we need to think of alternative spaces. There was already a performance that took place actually in one of the main streets that were devastated from the blast.
mm.
And I have mixed feelings about that. But, you know, we can get into that later or not. But
Well, you want to say something about it? I mean, how did it happen that there was a performance in that street? Maybe you don't want to talk about
um,
it.
it was a play that was already supposed to happen before the blast.
Mm,
And the people who were part of it decided to perform it in one of the streets that were devastated from the blast.
mm,
And it's just that this is definitely something that we experienced to a certain extent after the Civil War, where we kind of rode the wave of devastation, you know, because it makes it, you know, quote, you know, sexy, right?
mm, mm,
Tragedy, devastation,
mm,
victimhood. These are sexy topics,
mm,
right? How can we capitalize on that? Because
mm,
I'm sure a lot of people can already see the funds coming in to help Lebanese artists, right? And
mm,
so this
mm.
kind of trap of painting ourselves as victims and really kind of making art for the sake of being um, being shown, right? Like having our
Mm,
art be seen, and to
mm,
think that we have to, just like we felt that we had to include the Civil War in every single artwork that we made in the 90s and early 2000s. Otherwise,
mm.
nobody's going to fund us and no
Yeah,
curator is going to offer us a spot in a festival. I'm afraid that the same thing will
yeah,
happen now.
me too. I mean, there's so much to unpack there in what you're saying, and it's such important stuff, isn't it? Because um, it's also about kind of being allowed to talk about other things than those events, isn't it? And
Mm.
I know we touched on when we were talking before about the kind of dangers of the single story, right? And if that becomes the single story, um, and then the role of the gatekeepers if they're external to Lebanon, which they will be in terms of funding, and then
Of
if
course.
stuff's getting translated, and yeah, and
Yeah,
go
no,
on.
it feels like it's a situation where there's potentially a lot to lose. Whether
Yeah,
artistic integrity, whether the control we have over the telling of our own stories.
mm,
And to think that, it's not that we should have the freedom to talk about whatever we want and make art about whatever we want, but also
mm,
a lot of artists are thinking, can we make art about, I don't know, a romantic comedy when this has happened in our country, right?
mm,
So there's we want to have the right to talk about other things, but
mm,
we probably don't want to talk about other things. But at the
mm,
same time, is it too soon to make art about this thing?
mm, mm.
And yeah, so we're all just kind of trying to navigate this.
Absolutely. Yeah, because there is a notion, isn't there, or what sometimes happens is that it'll take a while after massive things happen before the art really comes out about it. So,
Mm-hmm.
I can think about some of the revolutions or attempted revolutions in 2011, and that certain aspects of that are only really being expressed now, or the way that Syrian art, for example, has kind of developed over these years, and or I don't mean developed in a linear way, like got better or something, but just like how it's kind of gone along. And yeah, there's a lot to try and navigate. And what about for you personally? Because I want to talk a bit more specifically about your work as well, because I can see that we're ripping through time and there's a lot to talk about. Because we haven't talked about, so your first play, which I was lucky enough to see nearly a year ago in Belfast as part of the Outburst Queer Arts Festival, the International Queer Festival there, um, which is called This Is Not a Memorized Script, This Is a Well Rehearsed Story, right? No.
Yes.
Yes. um, Tell us a little bit about that first off, because it's such an amazing piece of work.
Thank you. And I can't believe that Outburst was almost a year ago.
Mm,
It simultaneously feels like it was another lifetime ago, but at the same time
mm,
that it was just a few months ago. And
mm,
talk about queering time, right?
mm,
So this play is the first play I've written. It's an autobiographical one-person performance, and it's about a bunch of things. I kind of just packed everything in there.
mm,
Um, Talked about failed relationships, about mental health, about queerness, my relationship with Beirut, my relationship with language, the fact that I'm Arab but I write in English and I perform in English, and what that means. And so yeah, I had the chance to work on that play, develop it at Sundance, do kind of work in progress performances of it at Shabak, at Outburst, at New York University, and then finally premiered it in February 2020, just 3 weeks before the lockdown.
in
So
Beirut, yeah.
yeah, in Beirut.
Mm, mm, yeah.
So it came in between the revolution and the quarantine, just in that little space we had.
And it took, yeah, oh God, looking back on it, it's miraculous, isn't it? And it talks very frankly and explores in a very complex and interesting way queerness amongst other things and queer relationships. And so, how did that go down? Was it well received? I mean, in
It was
Beirut.
well received in
Mm,
Beirut. Yes, I mean, we performed for 4 nights, and it was packed. I received so much love from the audience and from people I know and strangers as well. And so I was very pleasantly surprised.
mhm,
I somehow had no doubt that people would love it, not because I mean I'm proud of it. I'm very proud of it, but I think
yeah,
also there's such a gap and a lack
mhm,
in queer representation and in queer female representation or non-binary representation, that
mhm,
people are like, oh, it what, there's a thing about that, and so they just kind of flock to the theater. They're like, what? Yes.
yeah.
So
A bit like the open mic that you described, right? With everyone streaming to the rooftop, like, yeah, yeah, I have something to say. Yeah.
exactly. So I mean, if I had heard about a play about non-binary queer characters, I'd be like right there at the very front, just like big eyes and listening. So I
Yeah.
there's yeah, we're hungry and thirsty for this kind of for these
Mm,
kind of stories and
mm,
representation. I've been
mm,
watching plays in Beirut since 2005, and I never saw anybody that looked like me,
mm,
in 15 years. That's a long
mm,
time.
mm,
So I think it was important for me, and I think it was important for other people
mm,
to see that.
mm. Um, I'm wondering about Amal Khouri's work, though. You must have been around for that, weren't you? Was that when was that?
Of course.
There's a play
So
about queer women. I mean, had there been one or two other things, or I mean, you don't mean it literally, I guess. Not seeing anyone who looked like you.
right. Um, Amal Rafael Khouri is, I always call them my theater fairy god person. They were like the person I looked up to in regards to queer and trans theater.
Hmm.
And I've known them for years, for about 10 years now.
Hmm.
And I ended up knowing about their play, She, He, Me,
Hmm.
which is a documentary theater piece about trans people, by accident. And there was one reading of it at the American University of Beirut, because the American University of Beirut doesn't have to submit any scripts or any performances to the censorship bureau.
Hmm.
But one of the reasons, and I hope they don't mind me saying that on their behalf, or saying that about, but it's something that they've told me and shared at different panels and events, is that they could not have their work produced in Beirut,
Hmm.
and that's one
Hmm.
of the many reasons why they left.
Hmm.
So when
Yeah.
I say that I haven't seen that representation, I saw that, that one representation,
Yeah.
and it was one reading for one day at the
Yeah.
American University of Beirut.
And and don't get me wrong. I mean, you know me well enough to know this, but in case anyone watching thinks that I'm like, well, don't grumble. There was that one play back in 2012 or whatever. Oh, Dima, come on, don't exaggerate. There was that one story that time. Um, but
No, but
back.
it's important. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alice.
Go on, go on.
No, but it's important to acknowledge the our queer parents, right? Those who have come before us, and who have paved the way, right? I'm talking about activists and other artists, and
Mm,
and and wonderful people and magical people who have
yeah,
done so much work that allowed me to be on stage back in February,
yeah,
right? So much work was done.
it was.
Um, I'm just
we know.
saying that there's definitely in that, in these 15 years of watching almost every single play, you know, I can count on one hand, like not even, um, plays that that addressed, you know, women and non-binary queerness and transness,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah. Okay, the time's going really quickly, I'm afraid, and there's so many things I want to ask you, and we've still got to do the queer idea. But I want to ask you. I know that your play that we're talking about, this is not a memorized script. This is a well-rehearsed story. Is going to be performed online or shown online, right?
Yes, yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
so people can catch it. So this amazing one-person show that explores all this different stuff that people raved about for 4 nights in Beirut. They can catch it online. So we'll put details across the screen of that. But that's coming up when?
So it'll be on November 11th,
Oh,
and it'll be part of a reading series organized by an Arab American theater company in New York called Noor Theater,
great.
Noor.
Hmm. Great. We'll put it
So
up on the script thing. Yeah, so people can catch that. And then I also want to ask you about, because you're working on a new piece, aren't you? And this really ties into what we were saying about kind of the dangers of the single story and whether or not you're allowed to talk or indeed want to talk about other things. Because I
mm,
believe that it is about an abusive lesbian relationship. Is that right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I had started kind of thinking about it and working on it before the blast. But one of the interesting things that happened um, after the blast, and I'm sure a lot of people relate, is that you throw yourself, one of the very many reactions and ways to cope is to throw ourselves into work.
Mm.
And so I've just been just working every single day
Oh
and
wow.
writing, and either, so I'd split my days between working on the theater relief group work and fundraising, and then working on my own play, writing different pieces, applying for grants, right? So I've just kind of kept busy, and kind of immersing myself in art, because for me, yeah, if I don't do that, then I don't see the point in much
Mm.
else. So I've been working on this play, which a lot of my friends are like, Dima, these are already very difficult times. You know, you don't have to
Well, I'll let them.
tackle a lighter subject, like a nice lesbian romantic comedy. Um, but you know, this is what I want to write about, and intimate partner violence is already such a taboo subject in this country, and so add to that queer intimate partner violence, and you almost find no documentation of it.
Wow.
and
Yeah.
and so yeah, so I want to be part of, I want this play to be part of a bigger conversation that's happening amongst queer people, and yeah, kind of just bring it more into the public discourse
Mm.
around it.
Great. So you're still in the process now of writing that.
Yeah, I'm finalizing a first draft this week, actually.
Oh wow, amazing. I guess also it's interesting that you identify yourself as being at that kind of end of the spectrum with regards to do you or don't you make art at this time? Like it's kind of all that makes sense, and it has a healing function
Mm.
and so on. And I guess also because of how extreme things are in the country right now, it's not like you can be out and about in the normal way as well, right? And you must be spending loads of time at home, and there's the whole COVID thing.
Mm.
So if you can get it together to concentrate, it's kind of amazing conditions in which to get lots of work done. Although I can also
Yes.
imagine getting absolutely nothing done at all. So I applaud you doing it. It's kind of
Thank
crazy.
you.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think that in years to come, people will be watching or reading that play, and that that you actually achieved it under these circumstances. Really, it's mad what us humans can do. Um,
I know. It's yeah, it's days of hours and hours of work, and days, just like this past weekend, where I just either stayed in bed or on my couch watching Netflix and not being able to even read a book, right? So I think it's important to say that, sure, I'm throwing myself into work, and I'm sure a lot of other people are doing the same, but there are other days when the anxiety is so paralyzing that
Of course.
just thinking about the next day feels impossible. So just to kind of say out loud that these two exist and everything in between as well.
Yeah, for sure. And that sense of futility, which is can be so overwhelming, I'm sure. I mean,
Mm.
a lot of people watching this will be relating to that, even just, well, not just, but as part of the experience of living through the pandemic, right?
Mm.
Even without adding in the sort of massive destruction of the city that's happened. Um, how would you feel now about giving us your queer idea? Are you ready?
I would feel excellent about it.
Great. Well, you're going to go to
um,
full screen.
mm. So, a couple of days ago, I started reading "Tipping the Velvet" by Sarah Waters. So one of the lesbian books, and I'm surprised it took me this long to read it. And I picked out this quote. I had that sensation again, that there had grown a lantern or a beacon inside me. I was sure that when she stepped upon the stage, it would be like putting a match to the wick, and I would flare up, golden and incandescent, but somehow painfully and shamefully bright. And it made me think of just starting to explore queerness and discovering that, this admiration we have for I mean, in my case, for other women, was actually me just like having a crush on them and wanting to be with them. And it reminded me of one of my favorite poets who has her name is Daphne Gottlieb, and she has a poem titled "The Frightening Truth About Desire." And the poem goes, "It's on, but I don't know if I want to be her, fuck her, or borrow her clothes." And so that is the frightening truth of queer desire, and I absolutely love it. So that's my queer idea.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's really how lovely to hear you reading Sarah Waters. It's like the finale of the series. Really cool. Thank you. I didn't actually say beforehand. I'm assuming that everyone's in the minutiae of the Sabah and MeeM format. That the point is that at some point in every show we bring a queer idea, and you do, and I do, and it can be whatever we reckon that might mean.
Mm.
Idea. So now I'm going to do mine. So here I am on my own in the shot. Okay, so what I need to get my head together. Yeah, so my thing for today is kind of a continuation in a way of something that I was trying to address last time. But it's about really queering and queer as a thing rather than an identity. So queer as a verb I was talking about last time, and but it's about how we look at how we really escape the normative without falling into it. And so there's this idea that queer is a kind of radical potential that can be realized, but it's not all the time. So it's very much the idea that I'm trying to get across is that it's a truly non-binary notion, and it's quite hard to get our heads around because we're so conditioned for binaries. So dominant culture is extremely binary, it's very essentialist, it's reductive, it's universalist, it is identity based, and it's very individualistic. And all of those things are so firmly rooted in the way we've been taught to think that it's really easy to fall into them as traps within our attempt at queering and queerness. So that, for example, we think very much in either or terms. So Dima and I have been trying not to do that in this conversation. or we think very much about individuals. And that means that we can massively praise or blame the self or the other as individuals. And that queerness argues that that's really not useful. So what I'm trying to get at is there's something about being sort of still being critical and ethical, but being open to this really fluid, really amorphous way of approaching the world that isn't undiscerning, but it's radically rejecting of the normative and of the individualistic, binary, essentialist, identity-based approaches to things. And I think if we do that, it's really, really exciting, because we get out of saying, oh, I've failed or you've done brilliantly, and we just get into a much more nuanced, explorative, curious and playful approach to being human. So there you go. Done.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you for this beautiful queer idea. I hope we remember this every single day.
Yeah, it's like a practice, isn't it, to try and put that in, to actually live that. Like, so what does it mean to approach the food that I'm trying to cook, or the conversation I'm trying to have, or the, like, whatever it is, in that way? What does it mean to try to, like, read a book or watch a film or something and say, okay, but I'm not going to be binary, I'm not going to be individualist, I'm not going to be essentialist, like, because it's like doing some unfamiliar yoga move or something where you're just like, what now? What bit of my leg? Really? There's a muscle there? Yeah. Okay, so we still have like a little bit of time, and something that I really wanted to go back to, because we wandered off from it, was that you were talking about kind of what happened after the Civil War with art being pushed to be a certain way with pressure from funders. And I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more about kind of what happened with art in that period, and also some of the art that has really inspired you and what you think really worked from that period, or that response, if that makes sense.
Well, just yesterday, actually, I was attending a panel discussion with Arab American artists, and how they're so often typecast into terrorist, extremist, etc., etc. And there's one theater maker I love, Hadi Tabbal, who said that, what if I want to write about aliens? I feel like I don't have the right to write about aliens, that I should always talk about my culture and Lebanon and what we do and who we are. And what if I just want to talk about aliens and write a play about them? And I think that is a sense of responsibility that a lot of us have, is that, no, we have to talk, we have to tell the world about us and what we're like, and dispel any stereotype, and fight the prejudice and all of that. And so we're all suddenly warriors in this thing, and we're depriving ourselves from the right to tell any story we want. And then because so much of the funding and so many of the opportunities, so many festivals are from the West, right? And Orientalism and exoticization are not a thing at all, right? I don't even know if you're familiar with the notion, but just in case you are, it's a big thing. It's a big thing, and it's such an easy trap to fall into, because I'll be the queer Arab woman checking all the boxes of oppression, and yes, please, of course, invite me to all your festivals. And it's so to go back to the Civil War, this is what happened. People wanted to hear the stories, people wanted to know, but people wanted to know only a certain kind of stories. And that it's a dangerous territory every time an artist feels like they have to create art for the curator, and for the funder, right? And I'm sure it's something that all artists are familiar with to different degrees. So there's been a lot of that, or like a story about romance, where everything is about this relationship, and suddenly the owner of the grocery store, who's flirting with one of the characters, gets a rifle out because apparently he is ex-militia. And I'm like, how does
Mm,
this fit in the plot?
mm,
Right? But it's
mm,
kind of like, oh, here's some little bit of Civil War material,
mm.
for you to remember that we are victims.
Yeah.
So yeah. uh,
On the other hand, presumably, what we need to do with this queering non-essentialist thing as well is that, like, obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Civil War is really woven through so much. It's the thread that runs through so much, right? Like, I'm
oh,
not saying the guy would have the gun and that's at all relevant in that story, but it's like, how do you get that tension right, or how are you allowed to have that balance, right?
I think I think one of the things that we are always doing is finding a balance, right?
Yeah.
As artists and as humans, because
Mm,
how do we talk about this thing that has affected us? I mean, I was born in 88 and the war ended in 1990. And I always
mm,
make the joke that I survived the Civil War with a diaper rash.
mm,
So that was my damage.
mm,
But honestly, we talk about inherited trauma. We talk about secondhand
mm,
memories, intergenerational trauma, and so we need to keep having these conversations in art, and we need to
mm.
figure out how we want to have them. But I
Yeah.
think ideally, I want us to have them on our own terms.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. You were telling me about a piece that you'd really liked with all the toilets.
Yes. I actually saw, in my whole nostalgic looking at old photos and memories, it came up today.
I
Um,
really,
yeah, and so it was an installation in an empty parking lot, and it was
mhm,
just a series of identical white toilets, just lines and lines. So I'm guessing about 100 toilets, and just one sentence that said, aren't 15 years of hiding in the bathroom enough? And that's it. And this is in reference to the fact that for 15 years, whenever there would be heavy bombing and people didn't have time to go down to the shelter, they would go hide in the bathroom because it was often at the center of the apartment or the house, so that there would be other rooms around it. And that's where the
mhm,
bomb would hit, and they would be the most protected in the bathroom. And when the August 4th explosion happened, my family members, their first reaction was to go to the bathroom and hide because
mhm,
we thought we were being bombed by Israel.
mhm,
And so it's this reaction, this reflex that we still have.
mhm,
And yeah, the artist was saying, haven't we had enough of
mm.
that? So yeah.
And something that obviously this is going to stand out to me, and it's not the most interesting thing about it at all, but I want to just flag is that when you told me about this the other day, I was like, huh, I don't get it. What do you mean hiding in the bathroom? And so, like, it's a very particular reference, like it's a very obvious reference to you, and
Mm-hmm.
what am I trying to say? It's like, I'm not calling it authentic, but
No,
it's
but
something around, yeah, or translatable or untranslatable stuff, isn't it? And about that thing of the outside influence of the funder and who are you speaking to? That wouldn't speak to an audience in London. It's interesting that when you
mhm.
interpret it for us, it speaks to us, but it doesn't. It's not for us, right? And that's part of its power, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I went there not knowing what to expect, and I just saw toilets, and then I looked up, and it was this massive banner, and I read that one sentence, and I just understood everything, right? I
Yeah,
just stood there, and I thought of everything I just told you and more.
yeah.
But anybody who hadn't experienced that or doesn't know about it, they're just gonna see white toilets.
Mm. There's some kind of, like, I don't want to be at all trite about it, but there's some kind of real metaphor there as well, isn't there, about what's going on in 2020? And then I came into this field and there was just 100 toilets.
Yeah, pretty much. Just,
Like, oh God.
yeah.
On some more crass level. We're out of time. Dima?
Mm.
I'd really like to carry on. I mean, we're going to talk again and not be on
Mhm.
film and be more, even more comfortable and not worrying about looking
Yeah.
at the video cameras. That I'm really looking forward to that. But in terms of this show and the public bit of this conversation and the episode, we're out of time. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm really, really, really glad that you could do it.
Oh, I'm really happy, and thank you so much for having me and for holding this space. I'm very grateful. So thank you for that.
Of course, my pleasure. My pleasure. And this is, I should just say to the like hundreds of thousands of people who are watching this show that's gone so viral around the world. This is the last episode of this current series. And yeah, who knows? Sabah al MeeM, maybe, we'll be back. But I'll be continuing to make and program and enjoy queer art and life, and I'll be doing everything I can to kind of bring um, artists from the areas where Arabic is largely spoken into the public eye. So yeah, like onwards and upwards, basically. And thanks for watching, and much love, Dima. Thanks again.
Much love.
Bye.